everybody. Welcome to another episode of Around the Lens Roundtable Discussions. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Joined with me as always is my co-host, Zach Roberts. Hello, Zach.
Hello, how goes it?
It goes wonderful. And our guest this week is Jason Houston, another returning guest from back in the day when we had our Around the Lens Discussions show. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm doing good. Yeah, things are good.
Awesome. Go ahead and remind our audience who you are, what you do, what your credentials are, so they kind of have an idea of, what you bring to the table.
Thanks. So my most of my career I've worked as a photojournalist. I did a lot of magazine assignments, and then as that world evolved and shifted, because of the subject matter I did, I was able to transition to working a lot with NGOs. And so the last 10 or so years, or last 10 or 15 years, it's been primarily NGO assignments. So sort of applying the photojournalistic approach to doing work with the nonprofit organizations that used to often be the subjects of some of the stories that I would be working on. And then in the last 5 years, since marrying my wife, we're now doing a lot of filmmaking as well. But it's
That's
all sort
awesome.
of in the same range. Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations on the
Thanks.
marriage.
Thanks.
And also on finding a collaborator, right? Because I mean, it's not too often you marry someone you can collaborate with on your, I'd say, creative ventures. So that's pretty neat.
It's amazing. We were colleagues for many years. She worked as a photo editor for some time, went into filmmaking before I did. We were really good friends and best friends when I moved to Boulder, where she had moved a few years before. And then in 2021, we got together. So
That's
awesome.
awesome.
Yeah, and it is great to have somebody to work with. That's for sure.
Indeed, indeed. Well, all right, great. Well, let's talk a little about your work with NGOs because that's where you tend to have, I think, a lot of experience where you can really impart some of your wisdom on us. Talk to us about how the NGO sort of industry has changed with regard to covering it for, as a photojournalist. How has it changed over time, especially post-COVID? And what are things maybe that people trying to work with NGOs today should keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a dynamic part of my career the entire time I've done it. So even prior to the pandemic, there were ups and downs with editorial, and that directly affected what NGOs were doing. I mean, I think in some ways the editorial outlets and the NGO outlets kind of had similar goals. They wanted to educate people on what was going on out there in the world, oftentimes very issue-driven stories. As in the late 2000, around 2010, when the magazine industry started really changing and advertising started imploding, NGOs didn't get as much coverage, and the issues that they worked on didn't get as much coverage. And so a lot of them moved away from just doing promotional stuff for fundraising or whatever, and actually into true storytelling, because they needed to educate people on what was going on out there in the world in order to be able to continue doing their work. And so, that was sort of the first point of evolution. I think this social media also really impacted it. A lot of the basics of a lot of these issues got out, but sometimes the facts weren't always really clear. And so, again, hiring photojournalists, hiring independent people who already had trusted audience, were already trusted with their audiences, made a lot of sense. The pandemic, of course, turned all that on its head. I think in the couple of years leading up to the pandemic, I was traveling about 200 days a year, most of the time for NGOs, sometimes for the magazine assignments. And, in 10 days in March, like so many of us experienced, all of that just evaporated. What was interesting for me is at the same time that was happening, I was already starting to make some shifts towards really considering if those 200 days a year on the road were something I should be doing. And whether or not that was, I worked a lot with environmental organizations, a lot on social issues where they intersected with environmental issues. And the idea of spending that much time in an airplane, flying around the world to drop in on a community that is not my own, that, even if I get a long assignment, it's a couple weeks. And, it started to get a lot of ethical questions around that. And so the pandemic accelerated a lot of that. And those changes were, there was prior to that, I was starting to do some participatory and socially engaged programs with some of the NGOs. And then with the pandemic, that really, in some ways, took a front row seat.
So do you have any involvement in NGOs today, or are you completely out of the NGO business?
Still doing it, not doing the big international work. Actually, another big shift for us in the last year or two has been the Trump administration.
No.
Not to talk politics, but whoops, oh, there you are. We going into his administration and all the Doge nonsense, we had a big sustaining contract with USAID that was a continuation of two other big storytelling efforts that we had done with them that were very community driven. It was participatory photography, working directly with the communities. We were starting to implement also video storytelling, so kind of really short form filmmaking, which is what a lot of the communities around the world wanted. And all that, we got a call one morning just before a call with some folks in Africa that said, we're on hold indefinitely, and we never heard anything again. It was
What is
crazy.
that? What do you think that's changed the like access? Because I know a lot of photojournalists and people that cover, like either work with NGOs and that sort of thing. USAID was kind of their flight over, kind of like it was like entryway of an American getting into some communities that normally would be difficult to get into, just either logistically, politically, or whatever. How do you think that's changed that access? As I feel like I just haven't seen as much work as I used to. Something just fell back
Yeah.
there on one of my sound tiles.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, if you have any thoughts or on it, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because NGOs have historically been a very legitimate and effective way for independent photographers interested in different issues to get access to it. Not only are you learning about it, you get to work with people who know the issue much better than you, so it can be
mhm,
accelerated learning. It can be really good introductions. And then just financially, like you said, it can support you whether it's working for the NGO or in some combination with editorial coverage on some of the
yeah,
issues that the NGOs are working on. So it's dramatically changed it. And US, not just USAID, but all of our NGO clients, tightened their purse strings, pulled back. They were uncertain about where funding was coming from. They were uncertain about
yeah.
what lists they were going to end up on if they did work related to climate change or, who knows, whatever else.
Let's talk a
Has
little
that
bit
has
about
that
that.
oh, good.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, has that affected, like, has that kind of a thing affected your like any grant work or any, I mean, I don't know if you like pull in grants as part of your filmmaking and kind of like your work, but it's just like I feel I've heard that it's, I mean, I haven't just heard. I know that it has that a lot of the larger and especially the international kind of like grant makers for that maybe not don't directly do filmmaking or don't do documentaries or whatever, but that might be like, oh, we can bring in filmmaking as part of this larger project have basically kind of evaporated in a lot of ways. I mean, especially, I mean, even domestically, I know a lot of funding sources that work that I've done on and things like voting rights or whatever has just like they've really anything that kind of is administration wise edgy. They've been like, you know what, we're gonna pull back and kind of like keep to our I don't know what the point of them anymore is, but
I
yeah,
know, I know.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's been, um, well, three things. One is, as the assignment and commission type work has dried up, I think a lot of us have turned
yeah,
to looking for grants.
yeah.
That's made grants more competitive. So where they still exist, they're often more competitive. And then I've seen two effects on some of these organizations. Some of the more bold organizations are actually like, we're going to step in and do more of this because we know it's
Mhm.
so hard. But we've definitely had, especially early in the administration when there was a lot of uncertainty, we've had some grants that kind of came in and then you weren't sure if they were going to be paid out or
Yeah.
Or the project suddenly needed a lot of oversight that we weren't comfortable with, and
Mhm.
because people wanted to not offend those that might come after them or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's messy, and as we know, I mean, you deal with voting rights, right? So that
Mhm.
democracy's it's threatened, and this is part of it. The freedom of the press and journalism and the ability to do our work, not only in the traditional media outlets and traditional press, but um, as independent nonfiction communicators, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Certainly.
So talk to me a little bit about, you said, obviously USAID and everything has kind of affected NGOs and whatnot. So talk to me about how the kind of reduction in budget and closing of certain agencies has affected NGOs in general, or, what you've heard from others who might have worked with those organizations. Is it harder to find those opportunities? Have they dried up, or, are there still enough opportunities to kind of make working for NGOs a thing?
Um, no, it's definitely gotten a lot skinnier. Um, I mean, very directly, a lot of programs that were supported by some of these larger, USAID is one, but a lot of these larger granting organizations just kind of like slowed down on the funding that they were doing, or they were worried about funding certain things that they were worried would be controversial, right? Um, you know, as a part of the reason I work as a independent, freelance photojournalist, nonfiction content person, and not for some corporation is because I'm oftentimes dealing with things that, you know, the things that align with my beliefs are not the things that align with the corporate interests or always the political interests and stuff. And so, especially in those controversial worlds, those controversial issues, that's where stuff really pulled back. And this is not just our country, a lot of other countries, and I've done a ton of work down in Peru. I've worked for over 10 years down there on a long-term project with a really good partner that I've worked with for a long time. And actually several different partners. One of them is a small NGO. He's been struggling with same political trends in the country down there. And so you mix, lack of funding up here with lack of political support and public will down there, and it gets a lot harder to do some of this work. Um, so yeah, the direct funding from USAID is a lot of impact, but I think just generally, and you know the culture around it all has gotten a lot sketchier.
Do you see this changing anytime in the future, or basically we have to wait till another administration comes in?
I think people are learning to work with it. I think, well, I mean, all of us who are working in these fields are doing it at least in part because it's stuff that we truly believe in, right? Whether it's the journalism
Mhm.
or working with the NGOs. It's not the place you go to get rich as a photographer. Um, and so I think, a lot of us who can afford to or who can make ends meet one way or another are sticking with it, and we'll find ways around it. We'll find new ways of doing things. Um, we're finding that shifting away from things like the really straightforward programmatic reporting has actually provided some opportunities to be a little more creative and a little more artful with some of the work we're doing. Um, and it's amazing how art slips through the cracks of censorship, and it always has, right? You've had, Tchaikovsky was a super controversial protest composer in Russia, and he used music because they didn't censor that. And so I think that's one thing that we're exploring a little bit is where can we push this into the art world a little bit more and really allow some of this stuff to remain conversations among the people who care with just a little extra cover.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, great. Well, let's move on a little bit here. You actually, like you said, have been doing a lot of interesting things with filmmaking and whatnot. And talk to me a little bit about sort of some of the projects you've been working on. I think there's one that you mentioned called Story Collaborative. What is that all about?
Yeah, Story Collaborative is name that we've given a participatory, socially engaged photography program that we have been sort of evolving. It started when it started when I was doing a magazine assignment for Nature Conservancy magazine. So combination NGO magazine type assignment up in Canada in a First Nations community. And um, they were like they were a community that had a lot of got a lot of coverage around some of the environmental stuff that they were doing. This was a slightly different story than that, but basically their response when we reached out and were looking to work with them was, we don't need another white guy telling our story. And I was like, yeah, I hear you. And this was as I was also starting to have questions about some of this stuff. And so we had some conversations around that. And um, they were working with Nature Conservancy Canada, so there was still a lot of value in their story getting out. But there was also an opportunity that we found for them to tell their own story. They had a group of high school interns who were um, learning sort of these this combination of skills based in Western science, communication, and all of this around tourism, and then along with their traditional culture. So they were working with elders in the community for traditional culture. They were, um, working with scientists who went up there for some of the rainforest stuff that they were doing. And so I offered to come in, and Nature Conservancy supported this, to do a workshop with the kids to have them learn to tell these stories themselves, so they don't need people like me coming in to do it for them. And that kind of started. So traditional participatory photography kind of workshop, like Photo Voice and folks like that have been doing for the last couple decades. Um, but it shifted towards, um, but after that, it kind of shifted towards, with a USAID project, it shifted to ways of engaging the community, the broader community. So rather than just like the traditional Photo Voice, Born into Brothels is that famous movie that's such a great example of how that started. Um, that was largely about empowering these individuals with the power of photography, right? Um, we were sort of shifting it to be how recognizing the ubiquity of photography, that a lot of people have much higher basic visual literacy because of phones and social media and things like that. And so we were looking at it as, what can we do? How can we use this to not only return authorship and agency to the local communities, but also sort of affect some of the programmatic, the the organization's programmatics around further engagement with the community in the issues that they're working on. And so that's evolved. We've done that in a bunch of different places around a bunch of different issues. With USAID, I had some different opportunities to do that, both in a very organized and workshop kind of format, but also got a lot of support for integrating it in as kind of a philosophical process to my own photography work. So we did what we called listening sessions, where it was, rather than sort of like the photojournalist coming in and making the photographs and, doing all the research and then delivering the story. It was a much more collaborative process with the community of sharing work as I was working on it, um, bringing them in at the sort of all throughout the process of creating, and then also, in some cases, some of them would contribute to some of the storytelling as well. And so we were able to integrate it in a bunch of different ways. But Story Collaborative is sort of the brand we put on this engagement workshop that we do. Yeah.
Very cool. And it's all part of your company, 816 Creative, right?
Yeah, that's what we've put together, my wife and I, for the film production. And then I also now do a lot of the photography through that.
And what does that name mean?
Um, it's like a lot of business names. It's an anniversary for us. So an anniversary when we knew that the creative collaboration was destiny.
Very
Nice,
nice, very
nice.
nice. I'm gonna put that on my calendar now, and then on that day, I'm gonna be like, "Happy anniversary!"
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You got quite a body of work here. I've been looking at your website, a lot of commercials and films and stuff like that. So pretty cool all the things you've done. And you have a film. My name is not Amy. What's that all about?
Mm. Um, so that is a autobiographical exploration um, my for my wife. She let's make this the short story. So she was born in Indonesia to an unwed Indonesian mother. She was adopted as an infant, raised in America, white American family in suburban Kentucky.
Hmm.
Um, Named Amy, and grew up in that environment. In 2021, she found out that she was actually named at birth and was in and so this film is documenting that process very intimately. It's I filmed it. It's about her. So it's just pick up the camera when we're sitting around talking about things, when she's having phone calls with people, when she's going through all these different things. But it's her process of reclaiming her name and her indigenous identity from Indonesia and sort of in the adoptee world, they call it coming out of the fog. So it's becoming aware of that identity in a world that often told you you were someone else.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, it looks like it's gotten some good festival runs there. So congratulations to you on that. Is it available
Thanks.
online?
Not yet. Yeah. If people are interested in actual festival screenings, or we have been doing a lot of community screenings. So there's, some of the concepts in it have been helpful both for adoptees and for anyone who feels like they might be displaced or disconnected from where they come from, right? And so even some of us who wish that we had better connections to our heritage or, our indigenous connections, for me, it would be back in Europe, and for others, it might be somewhere else. But a lot of those kind of conversations have come up in some of the community events that we've done as well. So it's had some festival screenings, and then we've also done a lot of these impact events.
It's very interesting because I've done two documentary films that getting the money for the filmmaking wasn't, I mean, it was tough, but it wasn't like the toughest thing. But actually, once the film is close to being done and then getting that money that's actually showing things at festivals and doing that whole process of like, never mind building the website and everything. I just see that because, I work for a nonprofit as well. You have a 501c fiscal sponsorship through Denver Film, which is like something I'm exploring through the documentary, what is it, IDA,
Idea,
when
yeah.
I make my first, like my own film. And but it's trying to get people to support the like actual release of the film is like has been like for the last film I did, Vigilantes, it was like pulling teeth because people don't realize like the just applying to the film festivals is a incredibly huge expense, especially after you just dropped whatever amount of money you did on filmmaking and you've done with everything. And it's just like, oh yeah, no, that's going to cost me a couple $1,000s to like, because you just have to, apply for a bunch. How is that? I guess like, because again, it's not an activist that, activism is not a dirty word. So but it's, it's like, it is kind of, it's not like a Ken Burns doc. It's something like that, that can be used in a way like you described, like is community and community organizing. How has that process been like trying to get it out there, like just and also like the money kind of, talk about like the money side of actually trying to like get people to want to see the film because like once it's in a theater usually it's a little bit hard to get people in seats but not that difficult usually if you have a community group but like getting that theater getting everything is tough.
It is, and festivals are. yeah, festivals are expensive just to apply to, not to mention if you want to actually go to one
Yeah,
and try to
yeah,
leverage the opportunity
yeah.
of being there, right? Um, and then, once you're in a festival, it's relatively easy. We worked really hard with festival programmers to build programming around it as well, so we would get as
Mhm.
much out of that as possible.
Yeah,
Um, and then we have a lot of connections in festivals, so we were able to get some waivers and things like that, or have festivals that know us that, are a little easier to navigate. Um, but the bigger part of your question is sort of that question around it's really a question around the economics of filmmaking in
yeah,
general, right? Because
yeah.
the reality is the traditional model of making a film that gets a bunch of box office returns
Mhm.
or makes enough money on streaming to justify it or anything like that is it just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially for never mind for documentary films, unless you're, unless you're being, directed by, released by Amazon and have a nice, cushy budget, like a certain documentary that's being released right now, and seeing embarrassing numbers, which is kind of hilarious,
Oh my goodness.
on a $70 million budget. But I mean, the big thing as well is, I mean, like Dave, you went, this is that everybody just kind of screams at you, well, just put it on YouTube. Just put it on YouTube, just like so people can see it. And it's like, well, weirdly, it's less likely if you just drop a film on YouTube. It's almost like it's you might as well just throw it onto a Dropbox file and not share the link. I mean, a lot of ways. Like
Yeah.
we've done. I worked on a 27-minute long doc about Pittsburgh and workers' rights and things like that. And if we didn't do any like massive like promotion, we didn't have any money to buy ads or anything like that. It would have gone nothing. But I mean, still only got like happy that we got that many, but like it only got like 20,000 views over a period of like months, and it's just like YouTube views, whether or not you can count them is people like clicking it,
Yeah,
watching
yeah.
30 seconds, and oh yeah, but yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's all relevant. I think two things. One is, you know, we because of the nature of the films that we're doing, we're not just doing entertainment. We really want our films to, foster, provoke interesting, important conversations around things that we really care about. And so when we're thinking about um, funding a film, you know, how we're going to get it out there and the impact that we're going to have is an essential part of that. So if we
Mhm.
don't have festivals where we're going to have an opportunity to interact with the audience in the ways we want to, then some kind of impact campaign makes a lot of sense for us. And
Yeah.
we're working on one right now um, with the native elder here in the Denver area, and
Mhm.
he's looking at the the history of land in Colorado. And we all kind of know the idea of like the land was stolen from the Native Americans and it was immoral and coerced and all of those kinds of things. But what he's actually doing is he's digging up the and in very careful detail the actual legality of everything that transacted for a bunch of the land in the Front Range here in
Yeah.
Colorado. And some of the things he's finding is that, even by today's legal standards, title was never officially transferred from Native communities to,
Yeah.
so some things like that. So mixed in with that is some historic education around the nature of Native communities, the people who lived here, all of those kinds of things. And so some of the stuff we're looking for with that film is, what about public education distribution? There's actually can be some decent support for getting these things into high schools where kids can learn it, watch it as part of the curriculum,
Yeah.
and that can help. So for us, that helps us achieve what we're trying to do by correcting the narratives. And it
Hmm.
can also help fund the film. I think the other thing, and this is something that I learned early on with working with the NGOs as a photographer, was for these very cause-driven films,
Hmm.
sometimes it's better to fully fund everything you need up front and then make it very low bar for distribution later.
Yeah.
So for example, it's a little easier to explain with the NGO photography. At first I would treat it like a photojournalist. I'd say like take your low day rates, hope that you can sell a story. Maybe there's stock opportunities in the stuff. Maybe every time you relicense it,
Mhm.
you get a little fee, right? What I started realizing was that for people who weren't used to working in media, like most of your communications people at the NGOs, that was a huge pain in the ass. Um, and the rates were really low. And then I'd have to go argue with the New York Times for 6 months to get paid. And then because I live in Louisville, Colorado, instead of Louisville, Kentucky, they'd
Yeah.
claim that they sent it to the wrong place. Like all the kinds of nightmares that we all know as freelancers, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so, what I started doing with clients is I was like, well, I just need to make a living. And if we can fund this all up front, then I can
Mhm.
give you all of these secondary rights to distribute these as handouts. So the New York Times comes to you and wants to do an article on this issue, and they know that
Yeah,
you guys are leaders in the programs around this issue, and they say, hey, do you have any photographs we can use? You can say yes. And you don't have to come back to me. We don't have to negotiate a license. We don't have to deal with any of that stuff.
yeah,
And what it ultimately did is it supported me more reliably to do the work, and it made it much easier to get the work out to an audience,
yeah,
right? And so I think
yeah.
the same can work with these cause-driven, impact-oriented advocacy even films, where if you're barely getting paid enough to make it, and then you're trying to get someone to pay to screen it, like
Yeah.
sometimes it's easier to just to find that person who really believes in it and get them to
Mhm.
fund it fully, including the distribution. And then that way the distribution is not, it's not on that small community organization that could really use it.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah. We were lucky enough that eventually we had some like larger donors come through and just realized be like, oh, if they can they'll like cover the costs of showing it in a theater if this activist, this organization, it was like something like Progressive Democrats of America could use it as a fundraiser for
perfect.
their nonprofit, and that was something that was useful. I mean, our next film, it's interesting because the next film I was going to be working on, I'm not working on it, but we were at the Osage Nation. Dealing with some like long history that is very similar parallels about how the Koch brothers actually that's how they made their money was off the Osage the from
Wow.
that Leonardo DiCaprio film
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
the I guess Scorsese film and but that same nation got screwed over by the Koch brothers like 60 years later and because they were all millionaires and they were skimming the top anyway long story but it was so much easier somebody who's tried to do like news work in big sky country down in New Mexico and Arizona and we thought we had the okay from the local tribe, but then didn't later on. And so it's
Well, right
you're
on.
lucky you have that connection.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think, and when you can find someone who supports it in that way, then
Hmm.
what's great too is like not only is the artist or as a filmmaker, photographer being supported, but then that local community organization is also being supported,
Yeah.
and that really feels like the right application of philanthropy,
Hmm.
um, because it's kind of a dead end if they, just give you enough to make the film, but you can't afford
Yeah.
to get it out there, like you were saying.
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, pretty soon we won't have to go out to make our films, right? Because we'll just be able to generate text and
Ugh.
all of our films will be created that way. Hopefully that day never comes. But we're seeing some creators who are stepping into that world. As filmmakers,
Cool.
us all, of course, this affects us because, when one creator does it, it tends to turn the magnifying glass on us and say, how are we using this? Or are we using this? Or how are we fighting
Mhm.
against this if we find it to be, I would say, abhorrent? So the filmmaker in question is Darren Aronofsky, and he actually has his own AI studio called
Oh.
Primordial Soup. And he's a big time film director, right? He did Black Swan, Requiem for a Dream. So he's not some, no name YouTuber like me. He's got credibility to his name. So when someone like him is doing something like this, which are a series of weekly videos that document and I guess reenact, if you will, moments from American history in celebration of the 250th anniversary of the country. That's been, backed up by Time and Google DeepMind and Salesforce and all these other companies backing him. How do we kind of react toward that? And, on the larger scale, what do we think of his work? And, is there a place for it, or is it completely, he is completely off the mark, and what he's doing is ultimately damaging for what we do as filmmakers? What are your thoughts on this, guys?
Hmm.
Jason, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
on one level, I have a pretty cut and dry response reaction to AI, because of the environmental impacts, because of a lot of other, a lot of the concerns that we're all very familiar about with it. Um, I don't use it directly at all. I'm fully aware that it's buried in my Google searches, and I've turned it off in my phone, but I know that in a lot of those places, it's a part of that, and it's increasingly a part of a lot of things that we do in the world. But to the extent that I can ever opt out, I always do, and
Mhm.
that's just my personal policy. You know, so related to that, I guess, concerns around creativity and stuff, unless, we've seen technology, we've seen the photograph change the way we think about portrait painting. We've seen, digital change the way we think about film. We've seen social media change the way we think about traditional journalism and print publications and all those kinds of things, right? So we've seen these kind of evolutions before, and we always survive them. And sometimes they create amazing opportunities for us. Um, so if someone can create, the basics with AI, and that means that they don't need to hire some overqualified content creator to create the basics, and they can instead bring that person on to do the flagship stuff that can't be automated, then that's great. Um, if it's truly replacing creatives, then that's unfortunate, obviously. um, I don't know. Maybe I'll let Zach go. He looks like he's got a few things to say.
I I always do. I have a long-standing belief that AI is a cancer on society and should be treated as such.
I'm with you.
And this now Darren Aronofsky, a director who I previously very like loved his work, Rec Room
Mm.
for Dream. I have an autographed, CD from Rec Room for Dream soundtrack over sitting on my desk, and it's be to say it's disappointing. That he would even consider this, but to say also that it's like it's just a corporate sponsorship thing is you can look at like it's not a thing that like if he had just come out as a I mean this is a guy that like when I went to film school, I went to small film school at SUNY Purchase and he had just come out with the movie Pi and it was this like mind-blowing independent film like the things that he did on it everybody was trying to copy, everybody was trying to figure out how he did this, the drill scene, what he was shooting with, the rigs that he was using, like that he just made as opposed to like buying stuff from B&H or whatever. And to watch somebody like this not just like do even if it was like okay I'm going to use AI myself and like figure out how to do it and not have it but this is like a Google sponsored you know it's a whitewashing of it. Yeah, I mean it's I'm trying to think of what the right term of it is, but it's
Mhm.
like it's the corporations are sponsoring it because they want to dignify this atrocious insult to human existence. And in the films that they are it's just like this is what the whole purpose of this thing is, and also slapping some stupid patriotism onto it that it would be this the American Revolution thing. And it's just it's watching the video. It's like if you get a chance, like suffer through a couple minutes of it to like really understand it, because it's badly done too. So it's just like this is a guy that had unlike the scrappy AI filmmakers I'm putting in quotes, for like finger quotes,
Mhm.
for anybody just listening. You're able to you have like a limited amount of things. You have your budget. You have I can spend $1,000 on the you know tries of doing this and redoing it over and over again, or even the subscription has like a certain amount. But this guy, I would assume Aronofsky has like he just has like probably the manager account, of the Google Deep Mind or whatever BS, and he's just able to do everything. And the shots are like worse than filmmaking 101. Like if you were to do this, if I were to do this in my like for my freshman film at SUNY Purchase using a 60 millimeter Bolex, I would have gotten a C. like because the filmmaking was just so like the shot of there's like a close up. It goes from the wide shot, the shot to the medium shot of Ben Franklin, and then he puts his glass down, and it's just a direct cut to that, and it's just like I don't understand like who I know that I think he just produced, I don't know if he produced, I don't know what the technical things would be on it, but it's just, it's a monstrous thing to see, especially using American history under this guy's using the Time magazine, label, which, Time and Newsweek have long gone kind of down the road of like what they used to be, obviously. But it's so disappointing because I mean, like you have Natasha Lyonne, who's a great actress and director that I respected before. She's also starting her own studio. And the voices on the Darren Aronofsky thing are SAG actors. Notice they're nowhere to be found. No, you can't find their name anywhere. So it's like at least they had the
Wow.
respectability of being like, we don't want our name attached to this thing. So I think that we have this problem, especially on independent filmmaking, where everything that you saw, in the 90s that was like the heart of independent filmmaking, video cameras were basically becoming affordable. Even film cameras, we could use the old Aries or we could use, even Bolex and then sync the sound, God forbid. And like that was like part of the heart of the film. You're like, I can't believe they did this with, Kevin Smith's film Clerks. You watch that film and you're like, if it had a $10 million budget, you'd be like, well, the dialogue was good, but like, where the fuck was the rest of the money? But then
Yeah.
he's like, oh, it was $28,000 that he put on his credit cards and maxed everything out and put everything in risk. And it's just like, there's a heart behind that. So it's like, it's one thing, I guess, if DreamWorks is going to come out with their next animated film or whatever, and we can all kind of choose to ignore it. But like, if this is what they're really trying to push is kind of I mean, there's a reason why they chose Darren Aronofsky and
Of
that not
course.
Spielberg or something like, I mean, I would hope to God that Spielberg couldn't be like bought in that way. But he is the guy that made good when it comes to independent film. Him and Tarantino and Nolan to a kind of somewhat of a lesser extent went from the scrappy 90s independent film and then making blockbuster films. And to have him do this is just so incredibly disappointing. And also the fact that it is really just slop, like
Hmm.
stuff that you're like, if propaganda, if the Trump administration come out with this and put it on their Twitter account, like so many of the other AI craps things that they throw out there, like we'd all be spitting on it. We would all be like, "What is this crap?" Not that even Petapixel, which is surprising. I don't know if you're a person that reads Petapixels. Usually the
Not
comments are like
often.
a mixed bag of like cancerous thoughts and hatred and whatever. It's one of the worst places outside of YouTube. Even
Yeah.
there, they're like, everyone is like, this is terrible. Like every single person, except for one
Wow.
guy he was like, oh well, this shows the future of it, whatever. And everyone else is like, no, it doesn't. And so like it's good that people that are like creating and that love the industry aren't. We don't see that many people moving over to AI or experimenting it that deeply. Um, it's usually people that can't create. They've like decided to go into AI, people who like normally couldn't draw a square if they tried 100 times. We were like, okay, well, I can go to AI and I can lean on this and call myself an artist, or a graphic designer that couldn't, figure out how to use, InDesign or whatever. And but again, to see Aaron Aronofsky do it is it's saddening. I mean, it shows exactly what it is. It's trying to give that, power of his name to it. And yeah,
I mean, it sounds like it's
it's
just a sellout, I mean,
it's
obviously,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I
You
mean, it's funny because like you think about like back in the again, I'm old enough to remember when selling out was a bad thing, and like if he had done this in the '90s, could you imagine the outcry and how much people would like just
Yeah.
his career would be completely done. Now this probably won't even be a ding, and it'd probably help him because now he's made new producer contacts at Google and wherever else. I'm sure his next film will be well financed, So
Well, and and these things live for such a short period of
mhm.
time, right? It's not going as negative as it could be, it's not going to impact his career for a time. I
Yeah,
think, you said something interesting. You said that the people who can't create are the ones that are using this stuff, right? And I think that's true to some extent. And that's also again what we saw with photography, right? Or
yeah.
journalism, right? It like people who weren't really journalists, who weren't doing quality journalism, were posting a ton of information on social media, and it was getting out there. And so, and then video production became so much easier with desktop and everything.
Yeah.
YouTube got filled with content, and it lowered the bar for quality. It lowered the
Yeah.
expectation for quality from clients, and it lowered the expectation of or the understanding of quality with the audience. And so literacy about what was good content or bad content went down. And that's something else that I worry about with this is, those us connoisseurs, people who maybe grew up with it or for any other reason appreciate this, the
Mhm.
quality and the art and the craft and all of that stuff, I think we'll always look at that stuff as sad at best, but
Yeah.
but the reality is it does affect us, and like we'll see people being like, oh, that's good enough, that's fine.
Yeah.
And again, like if that's an opportunity to say, okay, like we don't have to do the workaday stuff. We can really focus on our flagship. Maybe we need to pivot and do exactly the art that we've always wanted to do because that's the one place where we're really gonna, you know, continue to be able to do that. But I don't know. Yeah, it's rough, and you see things like Artlist. Like we're gonna end our Artlist subscription. It's so full of AI and it's so AI forward on all of that stuff. We're moving off of
Yeah.
Google and moving over to Proton where we can turn off AI because you
Yeah.
basically can't turn AI off of Google anymore. And I just, can't be complicit in
Yeah.
that. Whether it's these creative concerns like you're talking about or the burning of the earth that it
Mhm.
represents,
Yeah.
resource
Yeah,
wise.
no. I mean, my bill, my power bill in Virginia, Dominion has
Oh
already
yeah,
announced that
that's
that
right.
this is why your bill is going to increase by 10% in the next year and a half or whatever it was, and because we have to subsidize this for some
Wow.
reason, the Northern Virginia data centers that are going in. It is what worries me is sorry, Dave. It worries me is the quickness at which like the acceptance of this is happening. Never, obviously the speed of it, but I don't know if you remember Roadrunner, the film about Anthony Bourdain, which I was incredible documentary about Anthony Bourdain. I was incredibly excited for, and then just before it was released, the director was like, somebody asked him, "How did you get Bourdain to read all of these emails, like his voice and like whatever?" And it's like, "Did you edit things together? Do you whatever?" He's like, "Oh, we just used an AI voice thing." And it destroyed the film. Like I did not hear a single thing after that because Bourdain was such a beloved figure. His voice is, something that's sacred up there, with other, famous actors and things like that. And that destroyed the film. That was just, what, 5, 6 years ago. And um, now we have, this type of thing. I mean, it worries me deeply that whenever, like, how quickly we're going to start seeing, I see Al Jazeera, if you go on their Instagram page, they're using AI voiceover actors, and they're doing,
Wow.
or actor, I don't hate to,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
using
yeah.
their terms, voiceover AIs,
Voices.
and then also sometimes if they don't have visuals of things, they'll use AI, usually pretty clearly animated, but very clearly AI images in their news stories on their like Insta. I mean, it's mainly just on Instagram that I'm seeing it, but it's just like it is. I, as a person who used to work for Al Jazeera America, like, and I have never worked for a better news agency in my entire life. I worked for BBC Newsnight. I've worked for whatever the the ethical everything across the board for those guys. Like when it comes to the fact checking and everything, they were so incredible. They paid. I got a decent day rate for the first time in my life as a photographer when I worked for Al Jazeera America. Um, and but now they're doing that, and they have, there's such a huge well-funded network, and it's just like they decided that, I guess, I'm sure that the higher ups have made decided, no, you got to use AI in your work, like all the news agencies now have for some reason. But
Hmm.
yeah, anyway, Dave, David.
Yeah, no, I've been fascinating just listening to everything. And I'll play the devil's advocate, right? Because we have
Mhm.
to have counterpoint, point, counterpoint, right?
Yeah,
And,
both
watching the
sides of the
video,
story is not true. I mean, we're like,
I'm not playing all sides of them. I'm just playing
yeah, okay,
the devil's advocate, right? And,
yes,
what I think is interesting is that while we reject AI content outright because we know it's AI, I think, my kids or your kids or kids' kids or whatever, they're gonna not be as, I would say, reflexively anti-AI as sort of you are and we are, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so that's the kind of worry because it's like it's not going away, right? We can reject it as much as we want. We can turn it off on our browsers. We can vocalize our negative attitudes towards it for valid reasons, but it's not going away. So it's
So,
like, do you embrace it? No, you don't have to embrace it. But I do wonder, though, from a documentary film perspective, right? Because even in documentary film, you can have reenactment, right? You can have things that didn't exist that you have to create. And if you're on a very strict budget, which all documentary films are for the most part, unless you're, Brett Ratner, you have to find ways to sort of, I would say, you know, tell a compelling story on a very limited budget. So, do you think that there is a place, maybe, perhaps, maybe not now or maybe down the road, for AI to potentially be utilized in sort of a functional creation of, I would say, reenactment type things? Or in the case of the Darren Aronofsky, AI stuff, obviously there were no cameras back then, so everything had to be created. And I can tell you right now, if he were to pitch this project, to Time and say like, hey, let me make this sweeping, revolutionary war epic shorts on YouTube, they would have never, greenlit it because of the costs associated with it, right? It
well,
wouldn't have.
it wouldn't be financed by Google. I mean, that's the thing is that like it would that he could Aaron Aronofsky, if he wanted to, could get the best name actors. He could pull in the best people that would work for nothing. You see projects all the time. Bill Murray does projects for like $15, show up, that type of thing. And something like this, like that seen as a patriotic thing, you'd get some great actors that would do it. They're 2 minute segments. It's not like they're anything. And like especially this one, it's literally just two guys talking to each other in the most boring way possible with some and then some, period costumes and like that you can get at a in Hollywood, you can get those like any rental shop in America, or just go to Colonial Williamsburg and shoot it there. I mean like that this is independent filmmaking. Like this is the point. You figure out what you can and can't do. You wouldn't have, like AI, we're like, oh, well, we don't need Blair Witch Project, wouldn't be a creative project in the age of AI because it's like, why not? Why would we have to like work around the fact that we don't have a budget and we only have these cameras that we're renting for 3 days? It's just the lack of creativity that's going to cause, and the historical, whatever. I mean, it's just a theft machine. So I mean, like the idea that like why wouldn't you just steal if you're making a documentary? Oh, I don't have the budget for this. Why don't I just steal some footage from Ken Burns? Other than the fact that you'll get sued by PBS here if you use AI, even though it's an AI, it's just a theft machine stealing, imagery that has either been painted or photographed or whatever. Like, just it's the same exact thing. To me, like we do have a choice. I also, to go back to your point about your kids, you have a choice. You don't let your kids watch I'm sure there's cartoons that you're like, this is horrible. Like the imagery, the way that whatever you don't let your kids watch like the weird, I don't know, maybe you do the weird anime stuff, that's like okay for kids in Japan maybe watch it, but like here in America it's confusing. I don't know, but like or just some of the terrible crap that you watch on YouTube that is CG animated by a human being. I would never let my niece watch that as much as she wants to. And I would explain to her that it's garbage and kind of try to help her explain to it. And then she, watches Bluey or she watches some other, something else that actually was made by that made with somebody with a soul. And so it's just like I think it's up to us to it'll be around forever. It doesn't have to be the thing that runs society like they really want to make it be. And I think that that's the big decision. Like AI right now, it is for some reason the most important thing in the world by everybody from the president on down to editors and publishers and that sort of thing. For some reason we all have to embed it into our lives when it doesn't do anything and it doesn't help us. It doesn't help us do anything that we couldn't do before. That just takes maybe two extra steps. Maybe it helps us design a form or something like that slightly better. But that's what we then those people lose their jobs. Is that what we're saying? The people that creatives now aren't worth, trying to save. I don't know. It's the kind of defeatism that I hear from a lot of people about AI. I get that there's a reality that it's here and it's here to stay, but it doesn't need to be, again, we saw maybe like 20 years or 15 years ago when CG became a thing, computer graphics became a thing that kind of anyone could do with a good enough computer. We saw this insane explosion of absolute trash kids animation that has mostly gone away. It's on YouTube, it's on, the edges of Netflix and things like that. But like the good stuff rose to the top. And like parents didn't let their kids watch it because it was just, the writing was terrible, everything about it was trash. And I think we have that same choice when it comes to AI. It's like, okay, maybe if there's some like really well-made, crafted thing in 20 years that like the AI can create that has, good voice actors and has a heart and a soul or something like that behind it. I don't see it, but it could happen. Then maybe that's the thing there. But we can all make decisions in our lives to not do it. I mean, Jason, you say that you do your damnedest to not involve it. The only thing I know that Premiere has forced me to do it, their
Mhm.
automatic AI transcription. Unfortunately it's gotten worse as they've been kept forcing AI into it. Before it
True.
was when it was just I forget what this called. It's not AI, but it's a like
Just
Mavis
fast.
teaching software ages ago. It wasn't AI, but it was just it was learning, kind of thing. Like that's fine. I guess I have to use that because it is just something that demonstratable makes my work possible. Doing it, be able to do captions, being able to search through. I just put a 2 hour long podcast into a thing because I had to find one word that I heard as I drove down 95, and I was like, oh, I need this for a piece that I'm writing. And that's not something I just literally wouldn't listen to the podcast and I just would not write the piece. But it's just like we can make decisions on what we're going to do. Do we need a Darren Aronofsky, multi-part, short film special about how great America is, that destroys, you say, it just destroys water, just, burns water, burns the air, and makes all of our energy prices higher, just as we were coming to the cusp of, solar energy and everything else was making our lives potentially less filled with chemicals and crap as we try to breathe in America. Do we need this? No, I don't think we do. And I think that like as a society, we can all say, no, we don't need it. We get that some jerks are going to continue using it, but like let them do that in their weird corner and call them weird and call them icky when they do it. But that's me.
Well, you talked about obviously the theft machine, right? And I totally agree that a lot of these models are trained on, copywritten material, trained
Mhm.
on people's intellectual property. But we were just talking about the other filmmaker who's trying to do things with ethical AI, right? So what are your thoughts there? What if, they can create this same type of thing and don't take from anyone else, or everything they take is properly licensed from the creators? Is there a area where you're willing to give them some leeway, or is it still just not worth it because it, uses energy and it takes away from actual creators?
Jason, do you have a thought on it?
I mean, I think there are a lot of variables, and you're just bringing up some more, right? And there's pros and cons, and there's things that it'll do that will be amazing, and there's a lot of things that it'll do that we'll see as destructive. And it's so in that sense, it's really like any other tool. Um, and I think, you know, what are the costs and what are the benefits? And that's how we can look at it. And Amazon just the other day laid off 16,000 more workers. Those are people who are in the margins of our society, socioeconomically, and trying to survive. And that's a big cost. That's a cost that I'm concerned about, just as a human, as a person. Concerned about the quality of creative content from an aesthetic perspective. I'm concerned about the environment from those perspectives. And if I add all those up and then I say, but someone might make a clever movie out of
Mhm.
AI, and people get paid well. To me, the calculus is still, I'd rather not. I'm not
Yeah.
going to do it. You know, and maybe that'll change. Like, I think this is not dissimilar to a lot of technological tools that we've struggled with, reconciling, especially when they're new, throughout human history.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, well said, well said. All right, great. Well, interesting to take your perspectives on that, and we'll be interested to see how this series evolves. It does I think, paint a rather dire picture for, creatives in general, if this is the way that people are going to go. But, if you look at the views of the videos themselves, it's not getting like enormous views. So I think,
Mhm.
people are inherently right now trained to reject that kind of stuff. But you see pockets of it being, I would say, finding their place, finding their audience, right? That's what it's all about. It's about finding an audience. And, there is some AI content out there that is genuinely, how do I say, for a lack of better terms, entertaining for the few minutes. Like when you want to embrace in the slop, there is like sloppy content that, does entertain you for a few minutes. And if that's your audience and that's your target, right, then there are people and creators who can leverage that. And so it'll be interesting to see if that becomes a trend and pushes down the creators who actually want to create content. I know there's a great YouTuber on YouTube who called Saberspark, who talks about basically the downfall of YouTube animation, wherein there used to be plenty of amazing creators who would create amazing animation on the platform, and how they've just kind of dwindled away because of these slop factories, right? So,
Mhm.
hopefully the slop factories don't overtake, the content creators, but I don't know how else to stop it, right? We can reject it, right? We can train our kids to reject it, but I think we're in the minority right now, or, we will be in the minority eventually. And I think the majority will just go towards whatever is the cheapest, lowest common denominator form of entertainment. But we'll see. We'll see. Let's
Well,
let's hold out hope for the future of humanity, maybe, and that won't be the case. But
I
I
was
don't know.
super entertained by one of Trump's posts the other day where he was holding a penguin's hand in Greenland.
God.
Yeah, right. There are no penguins in
And,
Greenland.
and and you do realize that's a white nationalist meme. Like it's literally he's taking a white nationalist meme about them going towards like into society. I mean, there's
There's
New
the
York Times
flag.
just wrote a
Yeah.
piece
Oh
about it.
boy.
That piece. Also, the idea behind it as well. This is not weirdly not a criticism of AI, but a criticism of how
Of
whoever's
course.
social media person is. It's taking that famous scene from the Penguin documentary, where there's a penguin that walks off away from the ocean
Hmm.
to die. And so that's where Donald Trump is taking the metaphorical penguin in this meme is they're walking off into away from the ocean where food and water is to go die in the frozen wasteland. There's literally it's a Werner Herzog March of the Penguins, is it? Or I'm trying to remember if that's the animated film or not. But
Yeah.
there's a Werner Herzog voiceover on that scene that they took and it got memeified
Oh my
through
gosh.
the churn of white nationalist Twitter and everything like that. And so yeah, no, it's I mean I'm happy if that's what they choose to do, but that's I don't think.
Entertainment, as you said, David.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks. Well, this has been an interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Jason, for taking time out to discuss all these wonderful topics with us. Where would you like people to go to learn more about what you're doing or who you are?
Websites are good. We're not doing a whole lot of social right now. So my name, jasonhouston.com and 816creative.com, which is eight with a 1 6 creative.com. Um,
Wonderful.
yeah, those are our two websites. And I always love it when people reach out too. So if anyone's inspired or has questions or just curious about things, I love that as well.
Perfect. All right,
Yeah.
great. And Zach, anything going on in your world you want to highlight?
Just published a piece over at visu.news, so please check it out.
What's it about?
Talking about how the far right is embracing the boot,
Mm.
literally by the saying, embracing fascism in the streets.
Oh,
That in a way that 20 years ago or 40 years ago, we literally had the Oklahoma City bombing because of a similar thing happened, with Randy Weaver being shot by federal agents, and now they're saying, "Good, good, good. Let's see more of that." So
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Good work, Zach.
Indeed. All right. Well, this has been Around the Lens Roundtable Discussions. I've been your host, David Murphy, for Zach Roberts and Jason Houston. We will see you all on another episode. Bye, everybody.